Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this, our sixth edition of Facts Sizzling Summer. We are excited today that our topic is other places you can go. And our presenter is Dr. Jason Swanson, who not only you might have just heard on the podcast, and he is new to our podcast, but he's also new to our FCS at Home presentations. So I am going to stop sharing my screen here for just a minute so that Jason can start sharing his. And I am going to turn it over to Jason now. Just for a few housekeeping topics, remember that if you're watching on Zoom to put your name and location in the chat box, and if you're watching on Facebook Live, if you will put your name and location in the comment box, then we can, of course, know where you are joining us from. We do have moderators who are watching both the chat box and the comment box, so if you have questions, feel free to put them in there, and we will make sure that your questions get asked of Dr. Swanson. Finally, we have just want to remind everybody that if you are not needing to watch the interpreter, to turn off your screen so that we will get the best opportunity for those of our participants who are watching the interpreter. So with no further ado, Jason, I'm going to turn it all over to you.
I will unmute myself, right? Thanks very much, Mindy, and for everybody else for joining us. I had a virtual background, but it went away. So if somebody happens to walk through that door, you get to meet my family. So I think they'll be fine. I'm happy and excited to be sharing this presentation with you. And so thanks, Mindy and Jennifer, for inviting me to do this. I'm going to give one little caveat, just a little bit about me. I took a vacation day yesterday. It wasn't for fun, though. I had a small surgery yesterday, so I'm in the recovery mode today. So I'm feeling good, and I'm happy to be able to do this presentation. But if I take a little sip of water from time to time, that's why. But things are good. So the presentation title, "Oh, the Places You'll Go." I like that presentation. I like that title. I didn't come up with it, but I'm excited by it. And when I started thinking about it, it made me realize there's a lot of places that we cannot go now. So I'm going to start by talking about that a little bit, the places you will not go because of coronavirus and some of the issues that we're facing these days. Here's a map that I ripped off from CNN. It's showing places that are currently restricted to U.S. travelers because of policies in their home countries. So we have about 9 countries that we are allowed to go without restrictions. If anybody's interested in traveling abroad, if you've always wanted to go to North Macedonia, so this might be the time to do that. So there's 9 places we can go without restrictions. There's a few more places we can go with restrictions. And then some of those restrictions include showing a negative coronavirus test upon arrival, or maybe having to get tested when you arrive. Maybe paying $300 in a COVID insurance policy that some places are collecting, or even quarantining for 14 days upon arrival. So that's still a pretty big restriction. And then the majority of the countries and places, or the majority of the countries around the world are unavailable for us to travel to. And it's not just US citizens. Most of those borders are closed to a variety, or to just people from several places. I am a professor of tourism in the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment. So I teach classes about tourism. And so this is going to be an interesting semester for me coming up, because I've got to figure out I have to figure out ways to talk about travel and tourism during this time when the industry is getting hit so hard. And the recovery there's so much unknown about it. And so some of the things I'll talk about today, or maybe some of the things that I'll talk about during class throughout the semester. And also I want to add to this list, just announced earlier this week by the governor. So if you are planning to travel domestically to those 9 states listed there, that's the current list. It could change, but you'll be asked to quarantine for 14 days upon arrival. So that's just those hot spots out there. If you visit them, you come back. We're trying to limit the spread, of course. And so one of the things the governor said in announcing this list is now's a good time to visit Kentucky. So we're going to talk a little bit about places to visit in Kentucky and then some other ideas and some things that I've been involved with this summer. But before we do that, I'm going to get a little professorial. That's kind of the first half of this presentation will be some statistics and some general information about tourism, and then I'm going to just tell stories basically for the second half of my presentation. So what sort of impact has coronavirus had on travel globally in terms of the industry? Every year, last year was 1.4 billion people traveled internationally. So that's people leaving their home countries and going to another place, usually for leisure purposes, so tourism, to go on vacation in other places. So that's the impact there is 30%. You can imagine that's down. It's probably going to be higher, I think, by the end of the year, but the industry as a whole is about has lost a third of its size in terms of the number of visitors. In terms of revenue, the industry's lost or projected to lose more than $50 billion over the course of this year. And that's globally. Some countries really rely on tourism. And so there's a lot of countries that are hurt by this, along with individual companies and individual communities. Lexington's a great example. Having Visit Lex, the local Convention and Visitors Bureau, is funded by hotel occupancy tax. So if people aren't staying in hotels, then their budget takes a big hit. And they're looking at maybe a budget half the size of what they started out with at the beginning of the year. So that's a big deal in terms of promoting an area and staffing and all the things that a organization responsible for promoting tourism to the area has to do. Another thing I find interesting is people are traveling even during the middle of a pandemic, and I want to understand a little bit more about their thoughts and how that might be going forward. I'm going to make that chart larger so everybody can see it better, including me. What this chart is showing is people's intention or interest in traveling, and it's over time since March up until just recently, last week or so. And the question specifically is these travel providers, so hotels, airlines, travel agencies, are offering discounts, try to encourage people to travel. And the question was, will that encourage you to travel more? Do you agree or do you disagree with that? The blue line is showing people who agree with that statement, that they would travel more, they would be interested in traveling more if they got some discounts. And then the gray line is showing people who would not be interested in traveling more once they got those discounts. And what we're seeing in recent weeks is this gap, the growing number of people who are less interested in traveling, even with discounts. So that we're seeing, one thing that we're seeing is, the coronavirus isn't going away. I think it's having an impact on people's intention to travel. Some of these folks have already traveled. Maybe part of traveling is, or part of the reason for the spread is because of an increase in travel as we've opened up and gone other places and then come back home. So the short-term outlook, at least, continues to not be good, and the outlook is getting worse in terms of travel demand and what that means for communities and companies that rely on travel. And then, so what does that mean for the future? And this is what I have to think about when I'm teaching my class in the fall, which is an Intro to Tourism class, HMT 270. It's a class that's taken by hospitality management and tourism majors. And I have to talk to them about what's the future of the industry that they're interested in joining. So that's a bit of a challenge. A positive spin out of this may be, how can COVID-19 actually make travel better? And when I think about some of the impacts, I think of a place like Venice, which is shown in these two pictures here. In the picture on the left, that crowd size just kind of gives me the makes me cringe right now. I couldn't imagine being in a place with a crowd that big, even though I've done that plenty of times. I might even be in that picture, but I can't, it's hard to understand. It's hard to realize that maybe we don't do that anymore. And if we do come across a scene like that, that means that things are a lot different than how they are now. And then the picture on the right is, to me, it's indicative of the impact, or some of the more of the negative impact that travel and tourism can have on a place, just this giant cruise ship overshadowing the city. And I honestly believe they would sail that boat up the canal if they could. How can we get more people closer to these places? And I think that's what's going to be different. Maybe there's less mass tourism in the future, and it really helps alleviate some of the cultural and environmental impacts that travel and tourism can have on some cities that were vastly overcrowded over the past decade or more because of tourism. So one way to think about it, there's other places to go besides just those big destinations, and that leads us to Kentucky. We're going to talk about Kentucky tourism in more detail in a few minutes, but just to give you a frame of reference for now, more than 70 million people come to Kentucky each year, and they spend about $7 billion. So why do people come to Kentucky? Bourbon is big, right? Horse racing is big. But just to put that in a context, last year or the year before, within the past 2 years, the Bourbon Trail has hosted 1 million people. Only 1 million people, when you look at it in the context of 70 million people who are coming to Kentucky. So even though bourbon is big, there's a lot of other people, or people are coming for a lot of other reasons. And so we'll talk about some of those reasons, or some of those activities that people may be involved in just a few minutes. So my question is, if we can't travel far, what can we do? And I'm going to share a little personal story first, and then we'll get into a little bit more about things to do in Kentucky. This is a picture of my daughter. She was 9 months old in this picture. We traveled through Europe last year. So I think it's important to travel with your kids, no matter how young they are. And one of my favorite comments that I hear is, oh, she's not going to remember that. That's definitely true, but she's also not going to remember what she had for breakfast yesterday, or she's not going to remember going to the playground the week before, but we still did that stuff too, right? Just because they don't remember doesn't mean that they don't get something out of it. So that's my personal philosophy of traveling with kids. I didn't have that philosophy until I had kids, and I realized, hey, we can still do some of this stuff. So in the picture on the left, upper left-hand corner, she's holding an airplane ticket. She traveled from Inverness, Scotland to London on that flight. And then another day, even though she's wearing the same jacket, it's a different day. She's sitting on a boat looking at a map of Bratislava. Bratislava is the capital of Slovakia. The boat was on the Danube River, and she was traveling from Vienna to Bratislava for the day. So by the time she turned 1 year old, she had visited 7 countries. And I find that impressive, because the average American visits 3 countries over the course of their lifetime. Some people travel more, some people less, but she's already beat the average. So we spent her first year doing a lot of traveling, as is typical for me and my family. That year we were living in London we spent 3 months in London, so we were able to travel a little bit more. But that's what she did during her first year. So that's our lifestyle, a little bit of our lifestyle. What happens this year when we can't do it? So we were isolated at home. Kids' daycare's closed, school's closed, UK's closed. My wife's a professor at Center College, so she was doing the same sort of work that I was doing. We're all just home with our kids trying to figure out what we can do. So we made a trip around the world without leaving our yard. I saw a map on our wall that was a rectangular world map. And I said, that's the same shape as our yard. What can we do with that? And so if you can see this is an aerial shot of our yard. Superimposed over that is the outline of continents and countries. So we have Europe and Africa, Asia, Australia, South America, North America. And we mapped this out in our yard, and we would make borders, and we would make visits to these places still in our yard, but we would pretend like we were traveling the world because that's something that we enjoyed doing, but we weren't able to. So what can we do without leaving our yard? And our micro local, very local global travels, some things that we did, we made borders out of sticks or chalk in the driveway. We cooked food from each place. So we would go to, if it was South America Day, we would have lunch in Peru and dinner in Brazil. We did research on food and we made that. We made flags. This is a flag of New Zealand. So part of my son's, he's 5 years old, part of his school was to learn about continents, and we took what they were learning in school and used the flags, and he colored flags in different countries. We put them in the ground as we went around. We listened to music from the different countries on the continents we went to. We also identified animals. So they have bunches of stuffed animals, and we would say, we're going to South America. Are there polar bears there? No, put that aside. Are there sloths there? Yeah, let's include that. So that was fun to learn about different animals and places. During our meals, we would read about some of the history and the culture of the place. We learned about population and migration. So it's some of the same conversations that we might have if we were in the countries. So learning about the place without being there, you don't have to travel to a place to learn about it, even though traveling does provide a lot of learning opportunities. We pretended we were in different places, and we did that. We talked about currency. We even made passports and got those stamped. And we discussed some contemporary geopolitical issues, kind of, but not really. But they came up as we were learning about the history of different places, and we were able to talk about some of those issues as well. I learned a lot. So some quick photos of that. This is this is Antarctica, and if you look at the flag there, that's a picture of represents the South Pole. And these little flags around represent degrees of longitude. And one thing that I learned in doing this research for our world travels is whoever's at the South Pole, rather, I may have said North Pole, whoever's at the South Pole on Christmas, scientists or whoever happens to be there, they have this race around the world. So they'll set up some longitude flags, and they're able to race around the world, and that's what we did. We set up a little South Pole there, and that happens to be in our neighbor's yard. So we invited them over for an Antarctic dinner, which was challenging to come up with Antarctic food. So that's my son and my wife racing around the world. And that was entertaining for hours. We also had a little airplane. That's my daughter. She's 2 now, like I said. So she's our little airplane. She put the airplane costume on, and we fly from place to place. So we tried to be creative and do something interesting and based on what our experience has been and what we were not able to do this year without even leaving our yard. So back to Kentucky. There's lots of opportunities here. And to remind you, there's more than 70 million people who visit Kentucky each year. So what are they coming to do? Some of the things that we may do or that we may take for granted. And again, the rest of this presentation is basically a slideshow of my family doing stuff. So hopefully it's entertaining for you. We have had a lot of fun doing different things. So this is, we found a lake nearby in Garrett County. Hadn't been there before, so let's go somewhere new and do something we don't normally do. That was the day when the Fish and Wildlife Service said anybody can fish for free. You don't have a license this weekend. So we went out there with a fishing pole and just sat there and fished. Caught nothing, but had a good time doing something we don't normally do in a place that we had never been to. We made a little day trip to Wolf Creek Dam in Russell County. I had never been there. I've driven over that dam before, but I never really knew what it was about. So we went there, and they have a great campground. It's really clean and nice. We didn't stay there, but we walked through it and checked it out. They have a visitor center at the National Fish Hatchery, which is a federal facility that grows fish and stocks lakes and rivers with fish in Kentucky. The visitor center did happen to be closed because of coronavirus, but I think if it was open, it would be a really neat place to visit and learn about some of the local landscape and the local animals and fish, particularly in the area. There's also a visitor center at the dam as well. And so you're learning about what the dam does and makes electricity and the history of that too. So I could see it would be very easy to spend the night at the Lake Cumberland State Resort Park, which was just down the road, and come to this little area and easily spend half a day or even a full day if those visitor centers are open. It was a exciting thing for me to discover. I hadn't been there before. And this is a picture of the National Fish Hatchery, so you can walk through and see all the little fish and different stages of the fish life cycle before they release it out. So it's really interesting and entertaining. And I like this picture because I can see in my son's face like what he's learning about fish at that point and how the lakes get stocked and that sort of thing. So it's fun to see that for me. Shaker Village in Harrodsburg has been socially distancing for 200 years. So it's a great place to spread out and have some experiences that you might not normally have. They have 3,000 acres and it's covered in hiking trails, more than I ever realized. We just went there recently and discovered all sorts of hiking opportunities. Again, easy hikes, more strenuous hikes, but all sorts of things you can do at Shaker Village. This is one of our hikes. We learned about sycamore trees on our hike there at Shaker Village. Here in Danville, we went bike riding. I actually live in Danville, but we went bike riding in an area that was different to us and saw some things in different ways than we normally would see. That's the Pinnacles, and Jennifer and I were talking about that in the podcast. Excuse me. She was able to, or my son and my wife were able to go up to the top there and see that view. I didn't make it because I was taking care of my daughter who didn't want to go all the way up there. But we still had fun. She and I still had fun just digging in the dirt while the rest of my family was seeing that view. Not all activities have to be outdoors. There are some commercial attractions that are open, like the zoo in Louisville. You can see it's not too hard to get a 5-year-old in a mask if they're doing something they really want to be doing. So that was a fun excursion as well. And places like the zoo, as most of you probably know, they're operating on reservations, and so they're limiting the crowd capacity at those places. And the same thing as Salado in Frankfurt. Just another zoo. You can go there and see some Kentucky animals, and that was a fun experience. That was my first visit there too. So I've been to a lot of different places in Kentucky this summer that I otherwise probably wouldn't have gone to if I was doing more traveling around. And then this last picture showing my daughter again. We went to Berea twice, 2 different times, and then in Danville. I like watching her discover new things for herself, or even things that she's seen and done before, but she always gets really excited about that. When she wants to know what the bottom of a creek feels like, she gets to do that and share that excitement. And it's fun to travel with kids who see things in different ways. All right, so some quarantine travel tips briefly, and I'm almost done. You can experience the same place in different ways. So even if you live wherever you live or wherever you go to a lot, if you walk it, you experience one way. If you ride a bike, you see things differently. Go on a boat, you're going to see the place in a different way, or however else you might get around. So you can go back to a place, but do it in a different way. Travel around within the community in a different way, and you'll see it in a different perspective. And also try things that scare you or you might find boring. I listed a zip line. That's probably could be scary for some folks. A history museum may be boring for some folks, maybe not. But challenge yourself in trying to find things to do, things that are fun around your town or the state of Kentucky. Find something that will challenge you or make you stronger or more knowledgeable, or make you better off because you decided to do something that you currently may not think you enjoy. And then if you can, look at the world through the eyes of a 2-year-old. They're always seeing new things, and it's fun for me. I've realized that not everybody has a 2-year-old around, but if you can travel with people who maybe see the world in a different way, whoever that is, it's going to add to your experience while traveling. And then the last slide I have are some resources, and Jennifer and I talked about the TV show in Kentucky. You can watch those episodes. There's the website there. All 6 episodes are available, and I encourage you to do that because you might learn about some places you didn't know existed. And all this was in Western Kentucky. The television show was based in Western Kentucky. And it's also fun and an entertaining show, I do believe. And if you're interested in learning about Kentucky UK students, we had a really good group of students as well. So that's available for you as a resource. And then the Kentucky State Tourism website, kentuckytourism.com, is a great resource. And there you can search by city or activity. If you're interested in learning about Native American heritage in Kentucky, that's a category you can search by. So anything that you might have always wondered about, or maybe you haven't thought of yet, just go look at all the different categories at kentuckytourism.com and you'll get some really good ideas. And Mindy, that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to take some questions if there are some.
While we are getting questions in, I just want to remind everyone that you can always contact your local extension office for more information about any of our presentations. And I actually forgot to put up the QR code for today's presentation. So if you will check out either our Facebook page or contact your local extension office, they can get you the survey that will give you information about today's presentation as well. So Sally, do we have any questions? Are you seeing any questions on the chat? Or...
I'm being Sally, I think. Oh, no, Sally's still here. Never mind.
Just comments about how other people have enjoyed visiting the state and, you know, with their children, but I'm not seeing any questions unless I missed some.
Okay, I don't see any either. Maria, if you're not seeing any on Facebook Live, then I think we are going to get ready to wrap up. Jason, thank you for sharing your travels and your family with us. We have found that showing kids really does increase our viewership. So we appreciate that you brought the kids along with you. And I do agree that seeing the world through a toddler's eyes really does give you a new perspective. And
yeah,
so
for sure.
I hope that people will take that opportunity. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. We will be back next week at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, 10 a.m. Central on Thursday for our final Sizzling Summer presentation. And the topic will be Kentucky Loves Ag. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about our farmers markets and also about the Victory Garden campaign. So those are our experiences that we hope that you will enjoy with us next week. So I see no questions and I think we are ready to go. So thank you, Jason, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. And I want to say one more thing, because
Yes,
it looks like there's a lot of extension agents on. Some of you I know, but also it's in talking with Jennifer a couple weeks ago about all the stuff that's going on around the state. I understand that this group, the FCS extension agents in particular, have worked really hard. So thanks for all that you've done during this difficult time, because I know it's not easy for you either.
thank you so much. And yes, we do really appreciate all that our agents do to make our life a little bit easier and the lives of those in their communities. So thanks everybody, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.